My family disowned me for not being good enough. Now I'm the CEO who owns their entire debt. The air in the opulent, yet increasingly threadbare, drawing room was thick with the scent of old money and fresh desperation. Sunlight, strained through the heavy velvet drapes that had seen better centuries, barely illuminated the faces of the assembled family. Dust motes danced lazily in the few shafts of light that pierced the gloom, a subtle reminder of the decay that permeated every corner of this once grand home. The furniture, heavy and ornate, bore the subtle scars of time and neglect, much like the family itself. His cousin, Cassian, stood by the mantelpiece, a grotesque gargoyle frozen in a silent scream of panic. Cassian's usual swagger, a practiced performance of effortless superiority, had been replaced by a brittle, defensive posture. His tailored suit, usually impeccable, now seemed to hang slightly, as if mirroring the slump in his shoulders. His voice, typically a booming instrument of command, designed to fill grand halls and intimidate boardrooms, was now a reedy whine, thin and lacking conviction. It's simply an unfortunate series of market fluctuations, Cassian insisted, gesturing vaguely with a hand that trembled ever so slightly. The manicured nails a stark contrast to the unraveling situation. No one could have predicted this. We've always been a pillar of the community, Valerius Textiles. It's unthinkable. Unthinkable, indeed. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. He watched Cassian, observing every flicker of emotion, every subtle tell. Cassian was still the same Cassian, even on the precipice of ruin, still weaving elaborate narratives of external blame rather than confronting the rot within. The self-deception was a familiar, almost comforting, spectacle. The family, a constellation of averted gazes and hushed murmurs, clung to Cassian's every word like desperate shipwreck survivors to a flimsy raft, even as the icy waters rose around them. They looked at him, too, occasionally. A quick, dismissive glance, a flicker of residual contempt for the outsider he had always been. They did not know why he was here, a silent observer in their final act of self-delusion. They simply accepted his presence as an oddity, perhaps even a morbid curiosity on his part, a stray ghost from a forgotten past. The creditors were calling daily. Cassian, his Aunt Eleanor interjected, her voice tight with thinly veiled panic, a tremor betraying the porcelain facade she usually maintained. Her hand, adorned with antique rings, fluttered nervously to her throat. They're threatening to seize the assets. All of them. Cassian scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction, a hollow echo in the suffocating silence. Exaggeration. And negotiation is key. We simply need more time, a new line of credit. Perhaps a family investment, a pooling of resources. His eyes, for a fleeting, desperate moment, locked onto Thorne's, a challenge, a desperate plea masquerading as an expectation. Cassian still saw him as the penniless dreamer, the one who could be shamed into compliance, or at least into contributing something, anything, no matter how meager. Cassian did not know the full truth of the situation, not yet. He still believed he was the architect of his own fate, albeit a rapidly unraveling one. His gaze remained steady, unblinking, betraying nothing. He felt no anger, no triumph, only a profound sense of quiet observation. He had seen this tableau play out in countless iterations in his mind over the years, a carefully constructed mental simulation of this very moment. The despair, the denial, the blame, it was all unfolding precisely as he had anticipated. They thought he was merely present, a ghost from their past, a mute witness. They had no idea he was the hand pulling the strings, the unseen force that had meticulously orchestrated their descent. They were about to discover that the not good enough black sheep had become the shepherd, and their flock was about to be led to a very different pasture than they had ever envisioned. The documents in his briefcase felt heavy, a silent testament to years of struggle, sacrifice, and a determination born from the deepest humiliation. The full weight of their debt, their entire crumbling empire, was about to be revealed as his. And Cassian, his arrogant cousin, was about to learn that victory is not declared, it is earned. To truly understand this moment, one had to trace the winding path that led him here, back to the shadowed corners of his youth, a time when the very air he breathed in the Valerius household felt thick with expectation and disdain. He was Thorne, the younger, the quieter, the one whose mind wandered beyond the confines of their textile empire, Valerius Textiles. While his cousins, especially Cassian, were being groomed to inherit the mantle of tradition, meticulously taught the archaic intricacies of looms and fabric dyes, he found himself drawn to the nascent whispers of a digital future. His ideas, even then, were seen as radical, disruptive, almost sacrilegious to a family steeped in generations of dusty ledgers and threadbare traditions. They called him the Black Sheep, not with affection, but with a dismissive wave of the hand, a casual flick of the wrist that conveyed volumes of judgment. His lack of interest in their antiquated machinery and their dwindling profit margins was interpreted as laziness, a fundamental flaw in his character, a deficiency in his very bloodline. Cassian, always the favored heir, delighted in contrasting their paths. Cassian was the golden child, charismatic and outwardly successful, despite the slow, imperceptible rot beneath the surface of the family business. He would often corner Thorne during family dinners, the clinking of silverware and hushed conversations providing a backdrop to his subtle torments. His voice, dripping with condescension, would penetrate Thorne's quiet contemplation. Still tinkering with those computers, Thorne? A hobby, is it? While real men build empires with their hands. His laughter would echo through the vast dining hall, a symphony of derision, joined by the muted chuckles of other family members who, perhaps out of a mix of fear and genuine agreement, followed his lead. They saw his quiet nature as weakness, his unconventional ideas as foolishness. They saw him as not good enough. He remembered one particularly vivid interaction, a decade and a half ago, when he had dared to suggest automating the archaic inventory system. Cassian had merely scoffed, pushing a half-eaten roasted potato around his plate. Why bother, Thorne? Old Man Withers knows where everything is. This family has always relied on the human touch, on relationships, not on soulless machines. The family had nodded in solemn agreement, as if tradition itself was a shield against obsolescence. Thorne had felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but beneath it, a quiet conviction began to harden. He saw the future, and they were willfully blind. The defining moment came during a particularly fraught family meeting, roughly a decade and a half ago. Valerius Textiles was already struggling, a dinosaur lumbering towards extinction in a world that had moved on, a world they refused to acknowledge. His uncle, the patriarch at the time, a man whose face was etched with the lines of perpetual worry and fading authority, had called for a crisis intervention. Thorne, foolishly perhaps, had presented a meticulously researched proposal for digital transformation, for diversifying into e-commerce, for embracing automation. He spoke of efficiency, of global markets, of innovation, his words carefully chosen, his arguments logical and data-backed. Cassian, already positioned as the next in line, brimming with unearned confidence, had cut him off mid-sentence. This is Valerius Textiles, Thorne, not some fanciful Silicon Valley startup, he bellowed, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany table, making the antique silver clatter. We deal in fabric, in legacy, in tradition. Your ideas are childish, unrealistic, a distraction from real business. His uncle, ever keen to maintain harmony and protect the established order, had nodded slowly in agreement, his gaze heavy with disappointment. The collective judgment in their eyes was a physical weight, pressing down on him, suffocating. They accused him of disrespecting their heritage, of lacking loyalty to the very name he bore. Cassian, ever the instigator, had seized the moment, a predator sensing weakness. He's never been one of us, has he? He'd sneered, looking around at the hushed faces, drawing them into his narrative of Thorne's inherent otherness. Always off in his own world, too good for honest work. Perhaps it's time he found his own way, somewhere he can be good enough for his digital dreams. The words hung in the air, a chilling declaration. Disowned. Not a legal one, perhaps, but a far more potent social and emotional severance. He remembered the chill that seeped into his bones, the profound sense of isolation, a desolation so deep it felt almost liberating. They had cast him out, not for malice, perhaps, but for simply not fitting their mold, for daring to dream beyond their failing vision. He left that day with little more than the clothes on his back and a burning conviction that solidified into an unbreakable core. The humiliation, the dismissal, The stinging accusation of being not good enough forged a resolve within him that was unbreakable. He walked away not with anger, though a cold fire certainly simmered, but with a quiet, icy determination. His secret weapon, if it could be called that, wasn't a hidden talent or a magical inheritance. It was the absolute clarity born from that rejection. He understood, with an almost painful precision, what it truly meant to be self-made. It meant relentless drive, an unwavering focus, and a profound understanding that his worth was not, and never would be, determined by their archaic standards. He worked. He worked with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. His first venture was a small, niche software development firm, started in a cramped apartment above a bustling laundromat, fueled by instant noodles and cheap caffeine. While his family continued their slow, dignified decline, clinging to fading glory, he devoured every book, every course, every piece of information he could find on technology, finance, and market disruption. He learned to code, to manage complex projects, to strategize in ways that made their traditional business models seem laughably quaint. Sleep became a luxury, social life a distant memory. His sacrifices were silent, unseen by the world that had dismissed him. There were no grand pronouncements, no boastful declarations of his progress. He chose to disappear from their radar, to become a ghost, an echo of a forgotten family member. This was not out of spite, but out of a strategic necessity. He needed to build, unimpeded by their judgments or their demands. He needed to become truly formidable, not just for himself, but to answer the lingering question of not good enough on his own terms. And as his ventures began to coalesce into something substantial, as he began to acquire smaller, innovative companies and build a formidable tech conglomerate, he started to watch them, not with malice, but with a detached, almost scientific interest. He knew their vulnerabilities, their mounting debts, their stubborn inability to adapt. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that their arrogance would be their undoing. His plan, born from the crucible of their dismissal, was slowly, meticulously, coming to fruition. His ascent was a silent, relentless climb. While Valerius Textiles continued its slow, public decline, he was meticulously building an empire in the shadows. He established Horizon Innovations, a name chosen for its forward-looking implications, a stark contrast to the stagnant legacy of his family. They specialized in disruptive technologies, from AI-driven logistics to advanced data analytics, fields entirely alien to the fabric and dye industries that consumed his family. His initial capital came from a few shrewd investments made in nascent tech startups and an almost pathological frugality, allowing him to bootstrap his first significant projects. The early years were a blur of 18-hour days, complex algorithms, and precarious financial tightropes. There were moments of doubt, certainly, often late at night when exhaustion set in, but the memory of Cashin's sneer, of his family's dismissive gaze, was a constant, sharp spur. It was a reminder of what he was fighting for and against. He made it a point to remain invisible to them. His name was not in the news linked to Horizon Innovations. His public profile was meticulously curated, detached from his personal history, a clean slate. He adopted a new persona, a quiet but formidable CEO known only to those within his burgeoning industry, a man whose past was shrouded in a deliberate ambiguity. This anonymity was crucial. It allowed him to observe them without being observed, to gather information without raising suspicion. He knew, through a discreet network of financial contacts and publicly available records, that Valerius Textiles was sinking deeper into a quagmire of debt. They were making increasingly desperate decisions, taking on high-interest loans from dubious sources, mortgaging properties that had been in the family for generations, entering into unfavorable contracts with short-sighted terms. Cashin, still at the helm, doubled down on his arrogance, blaming external forces for their misfortunes, firing long-time, loyal employees, and alienating what few allies they had left in the industry. Cashin still believed in the power of their name, the supposed unshakable foundation of the Valerius legacy. He would occasionally make a public statement, full of bluster and empty promises, dismissing any suggestion of the company's impending collapse with a wave of his hand. He remembered seeing a news clip once, Cashin on a local business channel, scoffing at the idea of new money challenging established dynasties, his words laced with contempt. His words were poison, a distillation of everything Thorne had been dismissed for. Cashin saw Thorne's continued silence, his absence from their social circles, as proof of his failure. Thorne, oh, he's probably working some dreary desk job. If he's even managed that. He overheard Cashin tell a distant relative at a charity gala he discreetly attended, his face obscured in the crowd. It was a familiar refrain, one that merely reinforced his resolve, adding another layer to the quiet determination that propelled him forward. His plan began to unfold with surgical precision. As Valerius Textile spiraled, its debt became a tantalizing target. He started quietly acquiring their outstanding loans, not directly, but through a labyrinthine network of shell corporations and blind trusts, each layer obscuring the true beneficiary. It was a complex, arduous process, requiring immense capital and an even greater degree of discretion. He purchased their bonds at a significant discount, bought out their smaller, more desperate creditors, and through a series of intricate financial maneuvers, consolidated their liabilities under his anonymous control. Each acquisition was a quiet victory, a piece of their crumbling empire falling into his hands without their knowledge. He wasn't just buying debt, he was buying control. He was becoming the silent, invisible hand guiding their fate. The beauty of it was that they never suspected. Their focus was entirely inward, on their increasingly frantic attempts to stay afloat, like drowning men clutching at air. They were so consumed by their own perceived importance and the imminent collapse that they couldn't conceive of an external force, let alone one they had so casually discarded, systematically dismantling them from within. They sought new lenders, unaware that the true holder of their existing debt was not some faceless institution, but the not-good-enough cousin they had cast aside. He watched them sign new loans, unaware that the covenants in their existing, now his, debt meant these new liabilities merely dug them deeper into a hole from which he held the only escape rope. The Zygarnik effect was in full play within their world. Unfinished tasks, unresolved financial woes, a constant state of impending doom that kept them perpetually on edge, yet unable to truly grasp the architect of their misery. For him, it was a slow, deliberate chess match. Each move was calculated, each acquisition a step closer to the inevitable checkmate. He allowed them enough rope to hang themselves, not out of malice, but out of a cold, objective assessment of their trajectory. His quiet determination was the engine, his strategic mind the navigator. And as their financial woes became insurmountable, as the whispers of bankruptcy grew louder, he knew the time was approaching for the ultimate reveal. The stage was set, the audience assembled. All that remained was for the curtain to rise. The day of the final meeting dawned, gray and unforgiving, much like the mood within the Valerius ancestral home. A chill permeated the very stones of the manor, a silent premonition of the end. The air, usually thick with the scent of polished wood and stale ambition, now reeked of desperation, a metallic tang of fear. The family, a constellation of strained faces and nervous fidgets, gathered in the grand dining hall, a room usually reserved for celebratory feasts and boisterous family gatherings. Today, it felt like a funeral parlor, hushed and somber. Cashin, still attempting to project an air of command, paced at the head of the long, mahogany table, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the oppressive quiet. His voice, a strained baritone, addressed the assembled lawyers and bankers, and the handful of family members who still clung to the notion of saving what was left. "We simply need a temporary reprieve," he insisted, his eyes darting between the stern, unyielding faces of the legal counsel. "A bridge loan. Valerius Textiles has been a cornerstone of this city for generations. We have history, a legacy." A junior lawyer, a stern woman in a severe, charcoal suit, cleared her throat, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "Mr. Valerius, with all due respect, the consolidated debt is immense. Your existing creditors are no longer willing to extend terms. In fact, they've informed us of a new, single entity that has acquired the entirety of your outstanding liabilities. They've instructed us to proceed with immediate asset liquidation if a settlement isn't reached by end of day." A harsh, collective gasp ripped through the room, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from his Aunt Beatrice, who clutched her pearl necklace as if for dear life. Cashin's face went ashen, the blood draining from it, leaving behind a sickly pallor. A single entity? Who? We've been dealing with a consortium of banks, with private lenders, he trailed off, his voice rising in disbelief, his eyes wide with dawning horror. The carefully constructed edifice of his denial was beginning to crack. This was his cue. He had arrived earlier, having secured his invitation through the very lawyers now delivering the news, a quiet arrangement made weeks in advance. He stood up from his seat at the far end of the table, a place he had chosen deliberately, at the periphery, just as he had been at the periphery of their lives for so long. Every eye in the room swiveled to him, surprise, confusion, and a flicker of annoyance on Cashin's face. Cashin still saw him as an irrelevance, an unwanted guest, a ghost that refused to stay in the grave. Perhaps Thorne can shed some light on the matter, Cashin, he said, his voice calm, controlled, cutting through the thick tension like a finely honed blade. His tone carried no malice, only an almost surgical precision, a quiet authority that commanded attention. Cashin scoffed, a nervous, involuntary sound, a desperate attempt to cling to his fading authority. Thorne, what could you possibly know about this? You've always been useless with figures, too busy with your contraptions. He tried to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat, a strangled, pitiful cough. He walked slowly towards the head of the table, his footsteps echoing in the sudden, profound silence of the room. He placed his simple, unassuming briefcase on the polished mahogany wood, the soft thud a punctuation mark in the oppressive quiet. He opened it, revealing a stack of documents, neatly bound and meticulously organized, each page a testament to years of unseen labor. He knows a great deal, cousin, he continued, his eyes meeting Cashin's directly. Cashin's face was a canvas of bewilderment, slowly transforming into a mask of dawning terror. The color drained from it as Thorne pulled out the top document, its official seal stark against the white paper. For instance, he knows that the entity that has acquired Valerius Textile's entire consolidated debt is Horizon Innovations. And he knows that he, Thorne Valerius, is the CEO of Horizon Innovations. The words landed like a physical blow. A collective gasp rippled through the room, a wave of shock. His Aunt Eleanor clutched her chest, her face crumbling as if her very bones had dissolved. His uncle, the one who had silently sanctioned his disownment all those years ago, looked as though he had seen a true ghost, one that had returned from the grave not for vengeance, but for a meticulously planned reckoning. But it was Cashin's reaction that was truly captivating. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide, disbelief warring with a dawning, sickening comprehension. The arrogance, the bluster, the carefully constructed facade, all shattered in an instant. Your Horizon Innovations? Cashin stammered, his voice barely a whisper, a mere rasp. But that's impossible. That's a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate. You were nothing. You were not good enough. His gaze remained steady, unwavering. Indeed, that was the prevailing sentiment, wasn't it? Not good enough. A black sheep. Useless with figures, as Cashin just reminded him. Yet, here they were. He pushed the documents across the table towards Cashin, the heavy papers sliding effortlessly on the polished surface. These are the details of the acquisition. Every single loan, every mortgage, every outstanding liability. All of it is now held by Horizon Innovations, which means, Cashin, that all of it is now owed to him. Cashin's eyes scanned the documents, his fingers tracing the corporate names, the daunting figures that spelled their doom. The color, the very life, seemed to drain from him. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut, collapsing inward. The truth, in all its devastating finality, had just blindsided him. The room was utterly silent, save for Cashin's ragged breathing, a desperate, animal sound. His family, who had once dismissed him, now stared at him with a mixture of fear, shock, and a dawning, terrible regret. The reveal was complete. The architect of their ruin was the very person they had cast aside. The silence that followed his revelation was deafening, a vacuum where Cashin's bluster used to reside. His face, usually flushed with self-importance, was now a sickly shade of gray, like old parchment. The documents lay scattered before him on the polished table, stark evidence of his catastrophic failure and Thorne's unexpected, undeniable triumph. He looked up at Thorne, his eyes wide with a desperate, wounded disbelief, as if trying to reconcile the image of the useless Thorne from his past with the man now standing before him, the quiet titan who held their entire world in his hands. This is a trick, Cassian finally managed, his voice hoarse, devoid of its usual arrogance, reduced to a pathetic croak. You can't. You are nothing. You were supposed to fail. They dismissed you because you weren't good enough. Thorne's expression remained unreadable, a calm, unwavering mask. And that, Cassian, was precisely the mistake. You judged him by your narrow, antiquated standards. You saw his refusal to conform as weakness, his ambition for something different as a flaw. He paused, letting his words sink into the heavy air, each one a nail in the coffin of their former lives. While you clung to a dying legacy, convinced of your own inherent superiority, he was building a future. His Aunt Eleanor, usually so prim and composed, a bastion of Valerius propriety, burst into tears, her face crumbling, revealing the deep lines of stress and fear. "Thorne, please," she sobbed, reaching a trembling hand out towards him, a desperate plea for mercy. "Their family. You can't just let everything collapse. This is their heritage." He met her gaze, his voice still calm, devoid of any emotional flourish, yet carrying the weight of unassailable logic. Heritage, Aunt, is built on more than just dusty traditions and a grand name. It's built on adaptability, on foresight, on recognizing potential where others see only deviation. He gestured vaguely around the grand, decaying room. This heritage was crumbling long before he became its primary creditor. It was crumbling under decades of mismanagement, resistance to change, and an unwavering belief that the world owed Valerius Textiles a living simply because it existed. The family members, one by one, began to stir, their shock giving way to a more complex mix of fear and dawning resentment. Whispers erupted, hushed and frantic, like a nest of disturbed vipers. Some cast accusatory glances at Cassian, their previous respect curdling into open contempt. His fall from grace was immediate, absolute. The golden heir, the one who had always promised to save them, who had reveled in his own perceived brilliance, had led them to this precipice. And the black sheep, the one they had scorned, was now the judge, the arbiter of their ruin. Cassian, seeing the sudden, devastating shift in their loyalty, launched into a desperate plea, his voice cracking with desperation. "Thorne, think of the family. Think of what this means. They'll be ruined. Everything, gone." He gestured wildly around the room, as if the sheer scale of their loss might sway him. "They can work something out. They'll give you a seat on the board, a substantial share." He merely raised a hand, cutting Cassian off, the simple gesture conveying an immense, unshakable finality. That offer, Cassian, might have been appealing 15 years ago. Today, it's irrelevant. Horizon Innovations is not interested in textiles, nor in salvage operations. His purpose here is not to acquire a failing business, but to consolidate debt, which he has done. His words were devoid of cruelty, yet they carried the absolute weight of irreversible fact. The lawyer stepped forward, her voice crisp and professional. "Mr. Valerius has instructed us to proceed with the liquidation process immediately, as per the terms of the consolidated debt agreements. Unless, of course, the full amount can be repaid by the end of the day." Her tone was clinical, leaving no room for argument, no sliver of hope. Cassian sank back into his chair, utterly defeated. The fight had drained out of him entirely. He looked utterly broken, stripped bare of his arrogance and pride, a shadow of the man he once was. The Valerius family, once so convinced of their own superiority, of their unassailable position in society, now faced a future they had never imagined, one without their grand estate, without their failing business, without the illusion of their inherited power. They had dismissed him for not being good enough, and now, in their moment of ultimate vulnerability, they faced the devastating consequences of their own hubris. The shock and regret on their faces were palpable, a silent testament to the bitter taste of reality. He felt no surge of vengeance, only the quiet satisfaction of a strategy meticulously executed, and a long-held injustice quietly, irrevocably, rectified. Months have passed since that day, a period that feels both like an eternity and a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of things. The Grand Valerius estate, once a symbol of their enduring, albeit decaying, legacy, now stands empty, a hollow shell awaiting auction. The machinery of Valerius Textiles has been sold for scrap, piece by agonizing piece, its once proud looms dismantled. The brand name itself, once synonymous with a certain kind of aristocratic tradition, now exists only as a footnote in a bankruptcy filing. The fallout for his family has been, predictably, severe. Stripped of their inherited wealth and status, they have been forced to confront a reality they had always believed themselves immune to, a world where their name held no sway, their connections no power. Cashin, the once arrogant heir, is perhaps the most striking example of this transformation. He hears Cashin took a job as a regional sales manager for a small, struggling online clothing retailer, a far cry from the opulent boardrooms and lavish charity galas he once frequented. The bluster is gone, replaced by a subdued resignation. Cashin no longer blames the world for his misfortunes, but carries a quiet bitterness, a constant reminder of his own misjudgments, his inability to adapt. Thorne does not seek Cashin out, nor does he revel in his diminished state. His purpose was never about destruction for its own sake, but about the profound rebalancing of an ancient, unfair scale. For Thorne, life continues, but with a renewed sense of purpose and peace that settles deep within him. Horizon Innovations flourishes, expanding into new markets, pioneering new technologies that truly change industries. He remains at its helm, but the relentless drive that once fueled him solely to prove a point has evolved. It is now directed towards genuine innovation, towards building a company that values merit and forward-thinking vision above all else, a stark contrast to the stagnant traditions he left behind. The sting of being not good enough has long faded, replaced by the deep satisfaction of self-actualization, of knowing he built something truly great from nothing. His days are no longer shadowed by the incessant need for external validation. He sometimes reflects on the irony of it all. They wanted him to be someone he was not, someone who would fit neatly into their predefined box of expectations. They believed that worth was inherited, status was fixed, and unconventional thinking was a threat to their established order. His silence, his unconventional path, his initial struggles were all interpreted as failure, as proof of his inadequacy. Yet, it was precisely that dismissal, that forced independence, that forged the very strength they could not comprehend. It was the solitude of being cast out that allowed him the clarity and focus to build something truly formidable, unburdened by their outdated vision. The true measure of a person is not found in the validation of others, nor in the fleeting security of inherited status. It lies in the quiet resilience to define one's own path, the unwavering belief in one's own potential, even when the world, and your own family, tells you you are not good enough. Success is indeed a powerful form of vindication, but the greatest reward, the most profound peace, comes from understanding that your worth was never contingent on their approval in the first place. Build your own empire, not for revenge, but for the profound freedom of standing truly, undeniably, on your own 2 feet. If stories like this resonate with you, where quiet determination triumphs over dismissal, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss similar narratives. What do you think was the turning point for Thorne? Was it the humiliation, or something deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments below.